Welcome to the Grey Eye and Disability Arts online podcast, Disability And, bringing together thoughtful discussion and debate. This month, Colin Hambrook, editor of Disability Arts Online, chats with Benedict Phillips, artist and activist, about his work, The Agenda of the Aggressive Dyslexic, which was published 25 years ago. This podcast contains strong language.
I'm Colin Hambrook, editor of Disability Arts Online, and I'm really pleased today to be introducing Benedict Phillips, artist and provocateur, works in a multitude of practices. And Benedict, it was 25 years ago that I first published The Agenda of the Aggressive Dyslexic in Disability Arts in London magazine, which I was editing at the time with Ruth Bailey. Disability Arts was very much about protest. There was a lot of kind of discussion and protest on the streets and protest kind of bringing disability communities together. Mostly it was around access for kind of physical and sensory access provision, and so seeing this thing landing on my door, I think it was Suzanne Bull who kind of introduced us, and the agenda of the aggressive dyslexic as a really powerful protest about ideas that we really hadn't encountered before. You know, it was the first kind of real backlash against the neurotypical world. How did it feel to you, kind of having the agenda of the aggressive dyslexic, your manifesto, published?
I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about it, thinking back, was that I didn't set out to have it published. It wasn't. That's what I hadn't got to that stage yet. I'd met Suzanne and become friends with Suzanne. I think in 92, 93, and I sat down. You know, as a visual artist, you kind of write manifestos about things. I sat down and I wrote this thing, and it was just completely a kind of gut reaction, a sudden kind of coming out. And I just thought, Suzanne would be a really good person to send this to, and to say, what do you think about this? You know, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is this, what do you think? And she just immediately said, can I send this to my friend Colin? He's on the team of this magazine, Disability Arts in London magazine, and I was like, okay, and clearly she kind of communicated that she liked what I'd written. In some ways, it was another artwork, and I put it out into the world, and it found a place to be presented. In a way, the impact of it didn't really show itself, didn't really kind of exert itself on me until I was invited to be, on the editorial committee for the magazine, and that's when I had some really interesting kind of experience, which is that I walked into a room full of people, all of whom were disabled. I'd never thought about or considered myself as disabled. I'd not thought in those terms. That had never been presented to me. And I thought, none of these people are dyslexic, but everybody in the room knows exactly what I'm talking about. And that for me was this like massive leap. It was like a person who's been excluded from society for no fault of their own, knows what I'm talking about. Whereas someone who maybe looks just like me, another white man, who's, 5'9", has no idea what I'm talking about. And just says things that wind me up constantly with their complete lack of understanding of what I've experienced. So it's like, oh, this really isn't about the way people appear. This is about the experience they've had that connects them.
The manifesto is a very powerful and angry statement against exclusion, and a very kind of powerful piece of advocacy for thinking in alternative ways, thinking outside the box, thinking in creative ways. Where did it lead next in your thinking around making work about the oppressive nature of the neurotypical world?
I think after I'd written it, I realised that I was in a fairly kind of unique kind of position in a way, that because I'm so severely dyslexic, I was in the special educational unit, notionally being supported specifically for this in mainstream education from like the age of 8 until the age of 16. I'm leaving school illiterate. It was like, I am severely dyslexic. There is no way around this. It's that acceptance in my mid-20s that I was never going to learn how to read and write within the system. And that's what created the piece of writing, but also that's what spurred me on. It was like, well, then this has to be understood. It has to connect to people. And I did the first performance of it on Speaker's Corner in January 1996. And what was ironic about that was that I stood up there and started reading the agenda of the aggressive dyslexic. And I started becoming disorientated. I started losing my place, having to start again, having to reread, losing a sense of where I was within the text. It was like the text which talks about that experience was then exhibiting itself in me. And then the audience started saying to me, asking me questions, what are you talking about? And I started talking back. And my audience in like 30 seconds, was suddenly 4 or 5 times as big. And I was fluent and communicative because I wasn't constrained by the process that I was there to talk about, which was the system of reading and writing.
And can you remember the kinds of conversations that happened from that performance?
I think having put myself out there to a certain extent, I started to kind of get feedback. It was like there was enough of that information out there that I talked about these things, that I did start to get a lot of people kind of talking to me. But what most people were talking about, sometimes dyslexic parents, sometimes fellow dyslexics, trying to understand and trying to relate to someone else's experience. And I was acutely aware that the way that people find each other in our culture 25 years ago is through reading and writing. And here's these hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who don't do that, who need other people to talk to about this, So I became acutely aware of that particular kind of catch-22.
Very, very isolating.
The present figures say that under 20% of dyslexics are identified by the time they're 18 within mainstream education. So actually, the vast majority of dyslexics are unidentified within school. And even if they did a basic thing of saying, right, we know it's 5 to 10% of the population, okay, just look at your figures in your school. Have you identified 5 to 10% of the population of your school as dyslexic? Because we know those are the figures. Just as a starting point.
It's a terrible situation in many respects, and not surprising that so many people that end up marginalised and in prison, and the statistics there are pretty shocking, aren't they?
Well, I mean, it's over 50% of young offenders are identified as dyslexic, and it's almost like the exam they give you, isn't it? I think it's like you turn up in the Young Offenders Institute, and it's like, oh, okay, we've got a damn good idea partly why you became disenfranchised, why you fell through the system. We know that the time when adolescents start to get involved in kind of what could be described as slightly dodgy subcultural activity, petty crime, or just hanging out, or being in positions where they can get told off, is around the time that dyslexia really starts to impact. When people say to kids at a young age that they're that you're falling behind, and it's like that's the beginning of it. And then it's like this system just all through primary school just undermines you. You just go, why would I want to be part of this? And most kids can work out at 11, if they haven't picked it up by then they're never going to get anything out of this system.
And the work that you've been developing through performance, through sculpture, through public art over the last 25 years has very much been about turning those notions of dyslexia as a bad thing, as something that needs curing, inverted commas, on their head, and presenting dyslexia as a kind of positive attribute, something that gives has a lot to give to society in terms of unique thought processes that don't exist within the neurotypical world. So there's quite a catalogue of work that we can talk about that kind of came out of that initial publication, and I believe the kind of one of the next stages was the development of the Benedictionary. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I'd left London and I'd become a full-time professional artist. I think about 96, and as part of the Year of the Artist, 99 to 2000, I got this research grant. The Myth of Dyslexia is what I called it. And during that, I kind of realised dyslexia wasn't a single thing. It didn't exhibit itself in simple ways that people could simply respond to. And from this, I took all of the poetry, all of my creative writing, and I drew out over 1,000 words that I spelt consistently in my own way, and I paired them up against. In fact, my brother went through it, and he kind of paired them up, and he put a standard English spelling against them, and created this database. And then I worked with a computer programmer. In 2001, I had the online Benedictionary, and you could dump hundreds of words into it and press benedictionize, and it would translate it into dyslexic, or my dyslexic. And the irony that my name kind of means blessed word, or word of God, or but it means the word, Benedict. It just seemed like, wow, this is just a great coincidence. I was always supposed to be called the Word. But I think people really started to get the sense of humour that I was trying to communicate, that I wasn't, I think this is the thing, I wasn't out for revenge, I was out to communicate. I was, trying to find points of contact, and I was trying to understand and trying to collaborate with the audience in the world, for them to enjoy what I was doing.
I remember it being a lot of fun, playing with that online version of it, and that sort of playful kind of approach then sort of led to you thinking about the dunce hat and taking it as turning it on its head as a symbol representing positive interpretations of knowledge and understanding. and it was the white div, wasn't it? The dyslexic intelligent vision, the white div, that was the first manifestation of the div.
I'd been thinking about the dunce cap for ages. I really like this idea of the kind of surrealist tradition or the protest tradition of taking the thing that's used against you, taking it off the aggressor, the persecutor, and saying, actually, bugger you, I'm going to have that. That's mine. So I was taking the dunce cap and saying, right, this is the hat of empowerment. The hat of knowledge, of information, and trying to represent it in that way. I was acutely aware that I hated, and I still hate them, these kind of these images of small cowering children that are used so often to represent the dyslexic. Less so now, but they were very common. It's like, well, that child looks like they're more affected by bad lighting, and malnutrition than they do by dyslexia. What on earth is that about? So I was interested in the way that how do you visually represent these things, but also really concerned that I might become the dyslexic artist. It's like, and so the idea of creating an alternative persona to be able to say things that maybe I didn't even really believe, because I could be provocative, because I could be someone else. I could explore that, and be playful. And so Invisible Conversations, and My Misspelt Youth, and all of these kind of things that started to come out in 2005 as part of my residency at Yorkshire Art Space, we're all kind of about being, playing these games, but also trying to connect to people. And that's when I came up with this, this slogan, everyone can be dyslexic, you just have to try harder. And lots of people got that really, really quickly. It was like, oh, okay, the whole object of people coming and doing this exam and becoming dyslexic.
I loved the idea of the white teacher div, and bringing people into the space and asking them to choose whether to go through the lexic door or the dyslexic door in order to be encounter this exam situation. It's a lot of fun. How did it kind of work at the time? That was part of the Yorkshire Art Space.
It was, yes, yeah. So I had this great big space. So I decided to, I went out for weeks promoting this performance art piece because they didn't have performance art there, and that was part of these kind of provocative statements, was trying to get people into the room, and then I had these two reception people who were saying, right, there's a door for the dyslexics and a door for the lexics, so people would be asked questions when they came in, and they'd be given a badge which they'd wear around their neck. Again, it's like this is a physical representation of the invisible, and I'd been using the term lexic for some time, and it, as a counterbalance, I'd found the political imbalance. It was like normal or dyslexic. So dyslexic is not normal. That's not good. How can we have a debate? If you start from a position of being right, I'm essentially wrong. So the lexic dyslexic was about discussing people's personal experience, not just mine, but the lexic experience. And so by creating that, people started to talk to me about their experience of language from a non-dyslexic perspective, and I realised there are lots and lots of peculiar relationships with language, that was one of the things that really kind of, that really started to draw itself out, which was great. And that's when I came across things like hyperlexia, which is this, people who read, and I've met a hyperlexic in the UK and in America, on my excursions, and this thing where people read so fast they actually can't hold on to the information, but they can't stop themselves reading at super speed. It's become such a kind of ingrained, there's something about the way that they see things, and someone said to me very early on, when that reading dyslexic text, partly my spelling, slowed them down so much they could take the information in. That's kind of how that how that kind of came about. Someone saw some of my poetry and went, "This is great." I actually read it and understood it. It just slowed me down so much. Aha! I am the cure.
I know. I remember one of the very moving stories that you told us about that dyslexic exam with people coming out to you for the first time that about their dyslexia, about having hidden it right through their childhoods, and very kind of powerful experience for a lot of the participants.
Well, I also I get quite negative experience kind of responses as well. I've certainly had quite a few dyslexics. You just say, shut up complaining and just get on with it. Which is really interesting, and that does come on to one of the problems about talking about dyslexia is how incredibly different it is for every dyslexic. So and it's as some of my friends who are dyslexic have said to me, Benedict, I'm dyslexic, but I'm not Benedict dyslexic. And what they mean by that is that essentially they can read and write. If they review a piece of text that they've written, then they can pick up, what's happening in the spelling, in the grammar, in the they can see it. And I graduated at 21. I learned how to spell my middle name when I was 27. At that age, I carried a checkbook back in the day and a paying in book. I had 1, 2, 3, 20, 30 all written out in the back of my checkbook, so I didn't have to ask people how to spell 2 or 13 when I was filling in a check. It doesn't sit well with the idea of being a kind of young, autonomous man in our society. There are real problems the way that subject and object get mixed up, and I guess what I mean by that is that I see these days more and more criticism of object over subject. So someone writes a tweet, okay, which might be racist, sexist, stupid, idiotic, and deeply offensive, right? But the critique of it will be the spelling. They'll say that person's an idiot because they can't spell. And that, at its core, is just locked into our society. It's everywhere. So people don't critique what people are saying. They're not prepared. They're too lazy to actually think about what's wrong with that statement and critique that. They just go, oh, stupid, can't spell. And you just think, this is locked in, This isn't going anywhere fast.
You took the Invisible Conversations out to Kentucky. Did you get different responses in America?
I was amazed at how the experience, the educational experience, the kind of experience of being a dyslexic adult, in the UK, through the portraits I did where we had this conversation, then they drew something onto a blackboard and I used that as their context as the background and photographed them, and then did that in the States. It was like part of the research was, is it the same? And it was. It was like, I was amazed at how, it was like, okay, this is a kind of Western culture thing, and it's, like fast food, it's the same everywhere. The same mistakes,
That led on, didn't it, to the 3D thinkers in a 2D world, which I think you did the first presentation of that in 2007. Was that was an invite from a university, if I remember?
So yeah,
rightly.
so I'd kind of done this collaborative performance where, and in conversation with an artist called Gavin McLafferty, and down in Stroud, and it kind of really drawn out a lot of ideas, and then I got this this invitation to speak at, because I'd always included talking about this part of my practice in my lectures. I got this invitation. There was a national pedagogy conference at Leeds Art College, and I got this contact and said, "Would you like to talk about your dyslexia work? Come in and talk about that." And I said, "Yes, I would." And I said, "And the talk will be called 3D Thinkers in a 2D World." To try and communicate immediately the kind of the idea of the different thinking, about the difference between the individual, the 3D thinker, and the world, which is flat and rigid, and hard to fold and bend in interesting ways. So I went and did that, and that was really interesting. I got a few invites out of that, and they're all professional development talks, and that was really interesting because when I was doing those in universities around the country, be loads of staff going, "Actually, this isn't just a problem for the students." They were kind of going, it was like, staff were looking about, and, I was going, "So who's dyslexic in this room?" And like a lot of colleagues were going, "Oh my God, oh, you as well." "Oh, how do you cover that up? How do you navigate the system?" It's like, it's really, really hard work. Oh, right, okay. So that was really interesting, kind of doing that. Yeah.
I love the idea of dyslexia as a heightened depth perception. I think it kind of explains the lengths that you have to go to adapt and to kind of work out strategies for survival. Largely.
I think there's also one of the things is that there's the neuroscience, in a funny kind of way, is catching up with a lot of the things that I just thought when I was younger. So I find it really interesting that countries that are recognised as having populations that are best at identifying when public information news is true or not are countries where children don't start to learn to read and write until they're at least 7 years old. Okay? So being able to identify the truth correlates with an education system where you don't learn how to read until you're 7, or start learn to reading until you're 7, as within the state education. And the neuroscience is starting to suggest, or certain, science is always in a conversation and an argument about things, but there are theories and ideas that essentially the way a child's brain develops when they aren't taught to read and write, or can't access reading and writing when they're younger, it means that they use the other half of their brain. They use different parts of their brain, and they actually develop problem solving, and that very much is about the physical world and about coming up with lots and lots of answers to the same question, rather than the one-off linear fixed answer, right and wrong. And I think that's partly maybe what drives dyslexics into the design industries, because it is about, this really high percentage of people in certain industries who are dyslexic are in industries about problem solving. And they may be hardwired. And actually, if they were tested for problem solving skills, you might find that, and it's training. We do respond to our environments.
It's about opening things up, isn't it? And resisting that kind of flattening of our thinking processes.
Answers to problems appear as pictures in my brain, which is a good and a bad thing. Lots of people, I think, are 3D thinkers, think in these kinds of ways. They're not necessarily dyslexic. If you are dyslexic, you have to rely on it and you have to push it to the front to help you navigate the world. That's the big difference, you know. It's not just who we are, but what we use that creates these situations. And so if you have incredibly strong images in your head, you start to rely on them as truth. If they're that powerful, you know, if they're that fixed. And I do find that when I was younger, I had to be very careful for the fantasy and the truth, not to get too mixed up. Because actually the images that I created in my head were stronger than the images that were in front of my eyes sometimes. And I've come across that. It's the phrase I use, the phrase that I came up to describe this for people is natural born bullshitters. Which is this, you know, which you know, it's kind of like, oh, that's not necessarily very complimentary. But I've come across a lot of dyslexics and known they were dyslexic and said, oh, you're dyslexic, because I could immediately see they were talking shit. I mean that in the nicest possible way. What I mean is that they had a really powerful, strong argument that they had created in their own mind, and they were following through with it. So that's an interesting, it's an interesting thing. It's is that a superpower? Is that one of these dyslexic superpowers people keep on talking about, which make me really nervous when people talk about being better or worse than other people?
Yeah, it's part of that kind of oppressive way in which society kind of needs to kind of create hierarchies.
But it's also as a kind of shout out. So it's a kind of like it's trying to take a position. So it's like this is a massive thing in dyslexia for especially working with kids. I think it's like here you are in this appalling education system that was designed 150 years ago that would be great if you were going to go and work in a factory, no doubt, and all you need to do is be told what to do constantly every hour and not be taught how to communicate or to work collaboratively, right? Okay. Oh, you don't fit into this, but it's okay because you've got a dyslexic superpower. It's like, well, if you really had a dyslexic superpower, then what you would do is you would pick up your lightning rod and you would smite the school. So you don't really have a dyslexic superpower, do you? Because that's the first thing you would do, is burn it to the ground and start again with some empathy, with some understanding, with a school with dyslexic teachers in it. Could you imagine what training would have to take place, the structure of a university course to become a teacher if you were dyslexic? They would have to throw everything out in the same way that they can't say that someone with a physical disability, somebody in a chair, can be a teacher. I mean, how many schools can you get into? Oh, you're teaching upstairs today. Great. It's like it's just the world is full of barriers. And I see dyslexics saying they're not disabled, and I just look at them and I say, you don't know what disability is. Don't cut yourself off. You've been marginalised, and now you're marginalising yourself from people who could probably, other individuals who could really teach you something about how to protest, how to function in the world.
That's the social model of disability in a nutshell.
We've been in this conversation, haven't we, for 25 years, just between us, let alone all the other people, talking about these things, It's in there in the agenda of the aggressive dyslexic, I say very, very specifically, fuck the lot of you, This is who I am. This is how I'm going to do things. Because I have to claim it to have any pride, to have any autonomy. I have to claim who I am. That was the core, wasn't it? That statement.
And you've created some really powerful images, through the idea of the div, and you went on to create the red div and the grey div. Can you tell us a bit about those personas?
I was invited to go and do a lecture performance, and this was in Belfast at the International Symposium on Electronic Art, and I thought, I need to go and do 3D thinkers in the 2D world. This is about perception. This is about how we navigate. This is about maybe the way the universe our universe, our social spaces are going to develop. So I thought, right, well, this is a new div. This is the evangelist, and so I had this red suit made, and the red hat of empowerment, and all the little details that go with it.
The tree. There's a very intriguing aspect of the red div.
Yes. So the suit was made in 2009, and that performance, the first in that suit, the image wasn't made until 2 years later. I created this, keep everything simple because it becomes complicated all by itself, number 2, which is that tree is a model of society that I'd kind of done. There's a print posters where the end of every single branch has a word on it. And it's just this kind of cacophony of all these different typesets. And without a filter over the top, these coloured filters, you can't see where the sentences are. It's just gobbledygook. But actually the tree is full of all of these statements from all these different perspectives. So I was trying to build a kind of sculpture, 3-dimensional object, to try and describe the way that information was disseminated. It's a piece of architecture to try and talk about the complexity of society. And also there are precursors, so there are objects in all of the photographs. There are objects from the previous divs and from the divs to come. So the character after that's the grey div, and he's the architect. He's the one who sees the world in this kind of 3-dimensional way, Yeah. And also there's the teeth clamp in the red div image, this embossing stamp which I use for putting my teeth marks into the certificates that people got for sitting the exam in becoming dyslexic. So yeah. I mean, it's all in that film. There's a film from 2005 called The Div, and the exam's in there, and you see all of these different things,
The grey div, the architect div, he was involved in some conversations about architecture and about approaches to architecture. I remember us talking about this kind of dyslexic architect process.
I was really interested in what information fed into designing public space, into designing, not only our streets but our buildings, and I was thinking about all the things that you can't see that are kind of invisible to us. Again, sort of thinking about the dyslexic experience to a certain extent. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And so I thought, well, I'm going to investigate the landscape, and then I'm going to show it to people, but I'm going to show them stuff they couldn't see. So the first these tours that I did, were where I filmed the culverts, the river underneath the city, and then I had that placed on the side of a suitcase. I designed and built this suitcase, with a mini computer in it. I had to find, specialist battery technology. I had to connect all these different things, and I was doing this residency. Luckily, in Sheffield, this alternative acts of architecture, access space in Sheffield, and they could really help me pull all this together. But the end of it was I was walking along the street as the div in grey, above a river, which was on the suitcase, and behind walls, and walking over great big junctions of, over great big, with all these trucks and cars and all these traffic islands. At the position, there's a like a 200-300 year old kind of stone covered river running below our feet, and there it is. It's like that's a factor in where we are. So trying to discuss and think about the things we can't see, what should inform us, what things that we haven't acknowledged should inform the way we develop and design the spaces around us, But also that idea of transporting yourself to another place through your imagination. I see that as part of the 3D thinking.
More recently, you've been kind of developing the How to Be Dyslexic project. I I like presented as if it's a choice, you know, and again, kind of subverting that notion of choice. And can you talk us through a bit around how that project kind of came about and where it is now?
How to be a dyslexic artist is my research project that I've been doing for the last sort of 3 years or so. Took quite a while to find partners and to develop a kind of funding structure for that, and that's all leading towards an exhibition, which is, you know, essentially should be happening now, but isn't going to happen until next year now. And it was this, it was kind of how to be a dyslexic artist. It was the kind of question. It's like, well, you know, partly we're let's just take that artist forward and see what happens. You know, how do we navigate the world as a dyslexic? And working with other people has been a really, really core part of that. You know, so apart from Access Space in Sheffield, I also went and worked with an artist called Abby Watson, and we've actually been in contact for quite a few years. Abby wrote about me in her undergraduate degree and published a book. And she said, and she drew out, and she saw some really, well, it was just great to have someone have a look at some of the things I'd done and really understand it. And she's dyslexic and she's dyspraxic, and we worked together up at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland and doing this How to be a Dyslexic Artist. And I worked with some of the students there and some of the staff there to look at creating alternative personas based on internal experiences, about thinking about who we are, what is the same and different, and then using that as the base from which to build this alternative persona to present to the world. And then I built a lot bigger project which took place at a place called the Tetley in Leeds, where I worked with 11 adult dyslexics who were kind of between the ages of about 20 and 40, and with no need to be an art specialist, with a team there that could help people, you know, develop and make whatever they needed to. It was all about, what's your idea, what's your experience, what are you trying to express, let's explore that. And that ended up with this series of collaborative portraits, essentially. You know, they created these personas and I photographed them. I think what's interesting as well is that we're, obviously I can't say who, but I can say that I think 3 people there discovered further things about their differences, essentially. I think the knock-on from it is probably still there with people, you know.
Part of this project has been about looking back over the last 25 years and kind of collating all of this work that you've made around your experience of dyslexia and into a book.
This little world pandemic came along and kind of really put the kibosh on that a bit, along with my exhibition, and you know. So I guess the one thing that's not immovable, the one thing that I really wanted to kind of mark in some way was we have this 25th anniversary of me writing this first piece that went out publicly. That you know, in retrospect, has affected and informed the way I've thought about things. And at the time, I didn't, you know, I just thought I was shouting. But actually, looking back, it seems fairly concise, some of the things I was saying. So I thought, well, in a way, I wanted to kind of come back to it, kind of revisit it, and I realised people I'd known for years had never heard it.
Given the current crisis, you're planning an online iteration of a performance of the agenda of the aggressive dyslexic.
It's an interesting question in a way, because in terms of how I do these things, because often my performances are done to a live audience in a space, And there's a bit of call and response, you know. There are reveals within my performances where people kind of go, oh, there are surprises, and actually their response and their interaction with what I'm doing when they discover things, you know, is part of that. And so I'm really trying to assess, I'm trying to understand how I can move into making work, you know, for the camera. So obviously I do that for still images, for making photographic artworks, but so this is a very different thing. This is a different collaboration. It's not necessarily with an audience. It's with a filmmaker or with whoever else I'm trying to bounce things backwards and forwards from. So, you know, so that's interesting, and there's a way of try and revisit revisit the agenda of the aggressive dyslexic. I've written a whole A to Z, which I'm sort of writing and rewriting and writing and rewriting. You know, so there's for each letter of the alphabet, I've written a statement and a short chapter about an aspect of dyslexia. If you are dyslexic, how do you navigate a text-heavy society, text-laden? Not less so. I mean, when I was younger, there was less of it. You know, the notion that technology makes it easier for dyslexics is ridiculous. I use voice-activated technology. I can't write big documents without using voice-activated. I can't do it. It's just, you know, my brain is going in so many different directions at the same time. It can't focus on, you know, trying to work out what this shape is I'm putting on the page and try and remember what the next shape means. It's really, 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 really just amazingly complex process. But what happens is that when I've been doing it a lot, I start writing notes. You know, it's like my relationship to any kind of recognisable spelling. The more I use the drag and dictate or something like that, or the voice activated on the computer, you know, my ability to kind of hold on to, you know, even a phonetic spelling system just starts to dissolve and disappear, you know. So it's like, So now what it means is that if I want to sit down and write something, I have to be in a room with a computer, with a microphone on my head. That is the only place I can sit down and seriously write anything. But still, here I am at 50, defined by that experience, you know. I think one of the things that people do forget about dyslexia is that dyslexia is a construct of state education. Dyslexia was defined by the word dyslexia, which is a word that was specifically generated to describe it 140 years ago. And what else happened 140 years ago? Forced Western state education. Those two things came into being at the same time. Before 140 years ago, dyslexia was known about. It was called word blindness, you know. People think word blindness is the old word for dyslexia from the 1970s or 80s. No, it's from the 1840s and 50s. So it's like, here we are in a situation, the word dyslexia created to describe dyslexia 140 years ago, you know, and we still have this kind of mentality of state education, which is that they think that a class should have 30 in it, that teachers should be the exemplar of the drone, you know, leading the class. I just think that, you know, the bottom line is that the diversity of people that are in the world should be represented in the world. That's how it should work. When you think about the physical and mental health impact of good education, which is about responding, about empathy, that the classes should be of 10 students, all classes, and that would mean we'd have more teachers, which is great because they'd have work. That'd be people with work, not so stressed out because they'd have a class of 10 that they would be able to invest in those kids' physical, mental health, the impact on society, the function and the use of those individuals in society. If you've got 10 kids in a class, you can find out who they are and you can have a conversation. You can empathise with them. And from that position, you really can teach and learn.
That's the ideal.
But the div in black will be saying something about this.
Disability Arts Online will be presenting that at the beginning of October. So we really look forward to that. It's been a wonderful privilege to follow your work, Benedict, for 25 years. It's unbelievable how quickly the time has gone. Is there anything more that you want to add?
Well, you know me so much I couldn't even begin, so maybe I should just leave it there.
Visit greyeye.org and disabilityarts.online for details of productions, events, interviews, opinions, reviews and learning opportunities.